I remember back when I was in middle school, I had a bit of a habit of making things up. I spun tales that my friends never questioned no matter how outlandish my words became. It was because of this that I suppose I deserved what came after. It was one of the friends that I had told my tall tales to who first brought it up to me. It was this creature that he had seen online. A creature that had apparently been featured during a news broadcast somewhere. They called it the Rake. When I first heard of the Rake, I had a completely different mental image as to what it looked like. My friend had done a seemingly poor job at describing it to me, and thus my imagined monster looked a bit more like this. The entire tale that my friend told me was captivating. So captivating that I started researching as soon as I was able to. This is the part where the karma really kicked in. Seeing the art people had drawn of the Rake, as well as the alleged photos of the creature, paralyzed me. I could only keep looking, reading, scrolling, my throat dry and heart racing. I had made up stories, and now my divine punishment was to succumb to the collective efforts of the internet, as I developed a long-lasting fear of their own story. He is the Rake. The story of the Rake creepypasta is one that is often superseded by the creature itself, and rightfully so. The actual origins of the Rake are not that of a creepypasta, but rather, at least according to what I've been able to gather, a 4chan thread. This thread, like most things relating to old creepypastas, is seemingly nowhere to be found. Being nearly 20 years old, it would make sense if we didn't have an archive of it anymore. The general gist of the thread was the collective efforts of Alright, listen. About the thread. I cannot find any evidence that it had ever existed. The only actual real source I can find for any of this is Know Your Meme. And it seems genuinely nobody has ever asked about the origins of the thread. Despite this lack of evidence, the internet has collectively decided that this is where the Rake came from. While I have no reason to doubt that, I also find it a bit strange, because despite the internet's push to uncover creepypasta lost media, nobody actually seems to be looking for the thread. But a shout out to the hypothetical group of people actively searching for the original thread, who will now get mildly upset that I didn't know about them. You're definitely one of my favorite groups, don't worry. According to Know Your Meme, which I'm going to transparently state is my only source I have for this, the thread consisted of members from the random board of 4chan deciding upon the features and characteristics of the monster they were crafting. This is what ultimately culminated in the Rake. An interesting detail I want to note about the Know Your Meme page is its mention of the name Operation Crawler as one of the Rake's earlier names. But, in the words of one Nessie Retro,
more on that later.
The Rake as a creepypasta is much like Slenderman in that there isn't really a story it originated from. Rather, the Rake is more of a character that people can write stories about. Creepypasta derived from character rather than character derived from creepypasta. This has led to wildly different interpretations of the Rake as a character. I feel this has significance in a way that, once again, warrants a more on that later. The most popular Rake creepypasta, and the one you could technically assign as the story, was taken from Something Awful user Brian Somerville's personal blog on July 20th of 2006. In particular, this snippet from the post that always stuck out in my mind when I first researched the Rake well over a decade ago. This section of the post is that of a witness's life-ruining encounter with the creature. They were under the impression that their husband had gotten up to use the bathroom, and so went to steal the sheets back, only to wake him. When turning to face them, the husband was met with something horrible. There was a man sitting at the edge of their bed. Although, calling it a man wasn't quite accurate. One could easily mistake it for a large, hairless dog. It would scramble into the husband's face, staring into him before making its exit. Where it went wasn't any more desirable than where it had been, however. They could only hope to match its pace as it made its way to their children's room. By the time they had reached them, the damage was already dealt. Alive but gravely injured, their young daughter spoke. He is the Rake. The witness's husband would attempt to rush the girl to the hospital, but neither would make it. a nearby lake claiming both their lives in the frenzy to save just one. Only the witness and their son would live on, but not without knowing the unspeakable truth. They would attempt to learn more of this creature and its many victims. In the end, however, they were left with little in the ways of answers. They could get proof that it had spoken to them in their sleep, but never once was the creature seen again. They still fear that one night they may wake up to find it with them again, just as it had been the night it took everything from them. To quote the wise philosopher Dr. Smashy Cake, "Creepy shit. I want to read this to my kids when they are about 5 years old." Like any good creepypasta, the Rake is accompanied by supplementary media, although you wouldn't know that from just reading the creepypasta.com version of the story. A lot of the images people know of are fanworks, but in an interesting twist, there technically exists an official Rake image. Calling it official is admittedly misleading if you don't subscribe to the aforementioned story being the true Rake creepypasta, but I also don't think most people have seen this particular image before. Included with the original blog post is this delightfully bizarre image. While the post was from 2006, the oldest archive we have of the blog post is 2009. It's entirely possible that the image is as old as the post itself, and I have no reason to believe otherwise. I've never seen this image mentioned anywhere else, which leads me to feel bizarre about it. It barely took any effort other than following source links on the Know Your Meme page, which leads me to believe that people are either allergic to research, or they all succumb to this image because it's cursed to kill those who view it. If it's the latter, and you're not wearing your Midnight Crick approved Cognito hazard proof goggles right now, I'm sorry for exposing you. But also, skill issue. The list of strange Rake images doesn't end there, however. Who could forget the Berwick monster, the very image that friend had been referring to when he told me the Rake was in the news? This photo, even by Know Your Meme, is credited to the game Resistance 3, as it is believed the creature shown is a Grim. This is, taking all evidence in, not true. I have no idea why this is stated as fact. Please look at the Berwick monster image. Now look at the Grim. Outside of being humanoid in shape, these things are not the same. The Berwick monster has 2 large eyes, whereas the Grim has 6 small eyes. Making this more difficult is the fact that the source for this claim on Know Your Meme, Source 18, doesn't exist. What I believe started this falsehood is a tweet from late 2010. The account for Insomniac Games would tweet, "Oops, looks like one got out. If you see a Grim on the loose, please return to Insomniac Games, Burbank, California." Which on the surface looks as though it's claiming ownership of the Berwick monster, yet finding an actual connection between this tweet and the photo is basically impossible.
Okay, editing crick here. I just kind of realized while editing that actually, yeah, you can totally find a link. Like, literally, there is a link between this tweet and the image. That's what the link in the tweet is referring to. I just didn't notice that for some reason, so, good to keep in mind. That this is for those of you in the audience who are not looking directly at the screen. Otherwise, I would have just put some text on screen, but you know what? That's probably not a good way to do that, so here we are. Anyways, back to me in the past.
The closest thing to a source I can find is this article from 2010 by Sebastian Moss of PlayStation Lifestyle, where basically nothing of substance was said outside of vaguely suggesting it could have been viral marketing. The actual origins of the Berwick monster photo are the Archery Talk forums, where user Hillbilly Willy would post about this photo their trail cam took, also featuring a photo taken at the same location 9 days prior. As you may be able to imagine, the thread is flooded with replies, mostly comparing the creature to ex-partners and politicians they don't like, but flooded nonetheless. The user themselves, Willy, has other posts on the site too, most of them being innocuous, which I suppose would be the point if you wanted to pass this photo off as real. If it was their only post, that'd be suspicious. Yet I don't really know what to feel about the image itself. It's clearly not a Grim, at least. I don't feel I can give a concrete answer as to what this is. It could be a real photo of a prop or a masked man. A good friend of mine suggested it could be a mask with a flashlight to produce the eyes. It's also entirely possible it was photo manipulation, although I personally don't believe that. It's also possible that Hillbilly Willie was the victim of a prank, or someone set this up to scare them, or that Willie staged it all on their own. There is, of course, the chance that nothing was staged or manipulated, that whatever this photo depicts really stumbled across this trail cam and decided to give it a look over. What puts me off from saying this is real, despite how many paranormal-esque experiences I've had in my life, is the framing. What are the odds of the creature standing perfectly still in front of this camera like this? We saw with the deer photo that there was motion blur. The deer was moving past the camera when the photo was taken, resulting in a blur effect. According to Willie, the camera was set on a 2-minute timer. What this exactly means, I don't know. It doesn't seem like that could mean the camera takes a picture every 2 minutes, as the deer photo, labeled 134, was taken 9 days before the creature photo, labeled 139. My best guess, without knowing anything about trail cameras, is that the camera is set to take a picture when significant motion is detected, but has to wait 2 minutes after that point to take another photo, so as to not waste camera space due to a sudden burst of activity. With that hypothesis in mind, I don't think it's hard to assume that in order for this picture to be taken, the creature would have had to been moving in the shot. It seems almost impossible for the camera to decide to take a picture while the creature is standing so perfectly still as to take such a steady shot of it. With that, it would seem to suggest something about this was staged. Yet, at the same time, the framing is also fairly haunting. Willie's Archery Talk post also mentions that the camera was ripped from the tree it was placed on, and it was about 10 feet from where it should have been when it was found. The fact that the only photo we have is of this creature staring into the camera implies that it knows what a camera is. That it doesn't like cameras, or even that it doesn't like being seen. I find it chilling to imagine life on our planet with that level of intelligence and malice. My only real conclusion is that people really do take a lot of things at face value when they really shouldn't. Also, the aforementioned tweet seemingly has this counterpart posted not too long after it, which leads me to believe Insomniac Games genuinely has no connection to the creation or posting of this image. Finally, there's also this classic everyman hybrid image. If I'm not mistaken, most of these images are allegedly of a dude covered in clay mud. There's also the many instances of art that scared the shit out of me, but yeah, I'm gonna have to slap a big fat more on that later onto this one again. Actually, wait, no, that's not later. It's right now, because that's the next thing. Transition screen activate. What's taking so? I think the intro made it clear enough that I had a massive fear of the Rake when I was a child. Like, of all the creepypastas I had read, this one was probably the most impactful. This mostly came from the fact that I had my own interesting humanoid encounter around that time, and the fact that I had been living in, like, the absolute most perfect location for the Rake to attack me. My entire life had been living in some sort of wooded area, whether heavily or lightly. The idea that this creature existed out in the sea of trees you would otherwise not have any means of investigating left me with more than a few sleepless nights. I had already managed to fear the unknown, but the Rake definitely didn't help. The variability of the creature itself left a lot of details up to interpretation, which was absolutely the worst possible recipe for disaster you could ever cook up. I've already discussed in the Smile Dog video the horrors of being given just enough detail to let your mind fill in the blanks, and a creature like the Rake definitely fit the criteria required to haunt me like that. Interestingly enough, I don't recall ever having any nightmares about the Rake specifically, although vaguely humanoid creatures would always be there to haunt me in one form or another. I can recall one where a creature, much like the Rake, was crawling all over the exterior of my house, and the only way to keep us safe was to board up the windows so it could not peer in and see us. I do remember the art people drew of this freak making me uncomfortable, as a lot of artistic interpretations of it definitely hit all the right buttons to induce the dread such a monster deserves to inspire. In particular, this art from the Icky Man on DeviantArt always made me uncomfortable. Let it be known that this artist has drawn the Rake quite a few times too. They're a really good artist, although have seemingly stopped posting to their DeviantArt as of 2012. A shame. They also seem to have a pretty good sense of humor about things too. They're even responsible for this image, which I've seen everywhere. Another classic image is this one, although this one is a bit more interesting to me than the prior instances. For one, this image has been used everywhere on the internet, more so than any other image. If you're familiar with the Rake, it's almost guaranteed you've seen this one. The problem? This is clearly someone's art, and yet never once have I ever seen this piece be credited to anyone. So you know what I had to do. What I found was utterly bizarre. If you're familiar with the search for the original victim number 1 image, you'll likely be acquainted with the website Flickr. Well, this is where my search for the Rake art led me. But interestingly, it wasn't an answer I found. No. I found a question. Where's this from? Posted on November 17th of 2007 to the Flickr account Real Lies the Based God. The image in question is a significantly higher quality upload of the Rake art mentioned prior. Not only that, but the bizarre smear effect applied to it is now missing, resulting in the clear appearance of what appears to be an artist's signature. Unfortunately, despite the clearness of the photo, it still isn't quite clear enough to make out what the signature may say. What I believe my eyes can make out, however, is 05. This, alongside the alleged date the photo was taken, August 27th of 2005, leads me to believe the artist in question created this piece around the time the Rake was first conceived. The date of the art actually answers one of my questions about the art itself. That question being about the design of the Rake here. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to comprehend the discrepancies with the way its claws are depicted. Rather than having its own claws, the Rake is depicted as having some form of artificial extension to its arm, giving it long metal fingers on one hand. Something not described in the original story or description provided by Know Your Meme. In fact, now that I'm thinking about it, the claws were generally not described in any of the stories about the Rake, despite the name itself being very clearly in reference to raking claws. I also did wonder why the artist drew the Rake this way, but it's entirely possible that the design for the Rake wasn't completed or concrete at the time, so the artist took creative liberties relative to what we know the Rake to be now. This results in a design that could have inspired how we see the Rake, except for some reason it was decided that the claws weren't artificial anymore. I honestly believe the reason the original artist is so hard to find relates to where the art was first posted. It's very likely that the original was posted in or around the original creation thread, and thus its origins are just as lost. While I was able to find an even higher quality version from a February 22nd, 2016 post on the subreddit Imaginary Monsters looking for the artist, I still cannot make out the signature. Unless we can pull a Blame It on Jorge Herobrine stream event, it seems we'll never know who drew this creative and influential take on what we now know as the Rake. Fuck, that rhymed! The Rake is a character that has spawned more than just images. I feel it's worth discussing the found footage fan film made back in 2011. It's clearly the product of almost no budget, and as a whole is just a couple of friends fucking around in the woods for fun, but that is by no means an issue. In fact, part of the fun of this film is how simple it is. Being found footage, you already know something horrible is going to happen to them, so it's all about anticipating where it goes wrong. Throughout the runtime, you're sure to catch sight of the brief glimpses the film gives us of the Rake. It's cleverly hidden in the background, making what would otherwise be a mundane film into an engaging game of spotting its antagonist where the unfortunate campers were destined not to. You're powerless to do anything, being the only one aware of the danger, yet completely divorced from the group, making your knowledge nothing more than a curse. There's also a multiplayer game on Steam about hunting the Rake, simply titled Rake. I recall watching Markiplier play it. Also, for some reason, Mark read the Rake story on his channel as a standalone video back in late 2012. Thank you for your service, Mr. Plier. Fittingly, one of the mechanics in Rake is setting up and monitoring trail cameras. My most vivid paranormal experience video showed me something I had never anticipated. Although in hindsight it should have been an obvious outcome, I ended up receiving fairly stinky comments getting unusually upset at the prospect of me taking the paranormal seriously. To hopefully avoid repeating this problem, allow me to deliver a content warning. The following section of this video is not suitable for those who lack whimsy or fun in their lives. If you suffer from having a massive stick up your ass, you probably didn't belong on the channel to begin with. With that out of the way, it's time to talk about crawlers. Crawlers, otherwise known as pale crawlers, are pale humanoid creatures that are, well, if you're acquainted enough with the Rake by now, you'd know what they look like. They're a weird little thing I've noticed people talk about before. The details as to how they function and where they live are inconsistent between sources, and as a result I personally don't believe they exist in the way people have seemingly made them out to. But here's a proposition for you. I mentioned Operation Crawler earlier when talking about the Rake, and I mentioned I'd bring it up later. This is that later. Ever notice how the Rake is more of a concept than a character? How the way the Rake is depicted isn't consistent, and the version people often depict wasn't even like how it was originally described? The Rake's variance and inconsistencies are interesting to me. If one were to believe that belief is a powerful enough force to manifest something, what if the Rake's inconsistencies resulted in various lesser versions of it being spotted? People didn't focus their belief and fear into one version of the Rake, and so it resulted in said belief making confused bastardizations of it. This is where the concept of the crawler truly began to take off. Evidently, if any of this were true, we'd have to deal with fucking Siren Head of all things shambling around in our forests, which is obviously not the case. I could raise a point about believability and how fear impacts people, however. It's the fact that the concept of the Rake preys on more natural, believable fears. Waking up to see someone who shouldn't be there, having your safety violated, you locked your doors, your windows, your dog, and yet something got in your house. Seeing something that should be human but isn't. Something so close to us yet so deeply wrong and foreign to anything that should be on this planet. The Rake may seem outlandish, yet the buttons it pushes are far more primal than you may initially realize. As such, following the hypothesis, it's not impossible this allows us, for even just a brief moment, to manifest these things through our fears and beliefs. It explains why people claim to see these things. Crawlers are merely our primal fears manifesting for a brief moment, nothing more than visions of what we fear the most. Gone just as quickly and suddenly as they were born. I think about this stuff a lot in case that wasn't obvious. What a cool video. I'd like to thank the Rake itself for coming to my house. They were very helpful, allowing me to finally figure out what my insides look like. I'd also like to thank everyone still subscribed, because I haven't posted a single video in what will likely be 5 months by the time this video reaches you. It's nothing serious, just a lack of ideas and the will to execute said ideas. Although I will be experiencing a great deal of real-life change that may inconvenience the video making process. Finally, I'd like to thank myself for making this video, because without me, this video would have never happened. Thank you all for 1 subscriber. It means the world. Star Platinum, and perhaps Hermit Purple, if you squint your eyes, to me. And I can't wait until we reach 2 subscribers. Until next time, don't forget to lock your doors, even if it won't stop him for long, and have a fungus.